Tur Enilotemp, once Elowen, descended from the shattered mountain with a hunger that only death could sate. Her steps cracked the earth beneath her, and the air around her rippled with the heat of the godly power coursing through her veins. The winds howled in her wake, carrying the scent of death and the echo of the blade of sorrow's unending song, a discordant melody that twisted the hearts of those who heard it. The forest that clung to the mountain's lower slopes withered in her shadow, great oaks and pines crumbling to ash as if scorched by unseen flames. Those few brave souls who crossed her path, be they travelers, pilgrims, or unwitting villagers, found themselves frozen by her gaze, eyes like blackened suns that consumed all light. The boldest among them raised their weapons in trembling hands, but steel held no power over her. They fell before her, their bodies broken, their souls devoured by the insatiable darkness within her. The whispers spread like wildfire through the realms. A terror had come down from the mountain, a twisted echo of the hero who once served the Radiant One. And as word reached the great kingdom of Shomana, its people trembled, but its rulers stood defiant. The army of Shomana was summoned, a formidable force whose strength had once guarded the realm from countless threats. Clad in gleaming armor that caught the sun, they marched out to meet her, a line of steel and flesh stretching to the horizon, a sea of spears and swords bristling like the quills of a great beast. But against Tur Enilotemp they were nothing. She stood before them, a figure both terrifying and majestic, her presence casting long shadows that crawled like living things across the fields. The wind shifted, and the scent of fear hung heavy in the air. The soldiers murmured prayers to their gods, their breath hitching as they beheld her in all her twisted glory. Then she moved. The blade of sorrow sang a song of slaughter as it swept through flesh and bone with sickening ease. Soldiers screamed, their cries rising in a chilling chorus that filled the sky. She cut through them like a scythe, through ripened wheat, their shining armor offering no more protection than paper before the storm of her wrath. Each swing of the blade sent waves of dark energy rippling through their ranks, and men fell by the dozen, their bodies crumpling as if their very souls had been wrenched from them. She danced among them, a ghastly ballet of death, her movements a blend of elegance and horror, each strike precise, each kill deliberate. Blood pooled around her feet, soaking into the earth, turning green fields into a mire of gore. She fed on their terror, the blade growing sharper, hungrier with every life it claimed. The day wore on, but for Tur Enilotemp time held no meaning. By dusk, the fields were littered with the broken remnants of the once proud army of Shomana. Crows circled above, waiting for their feast, but she left them no flesh to feed on. She devoured it all, blood, bone, and soul, drawing their essence into herself, her power swelling with each death. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in crimson and shadow, the remnants of the Shomanan army broke. Those who still had the strength to flee turned and ran, abandoning their fallen comrades. The ground trembled with the retreat, but Tur Enilotemp stood still, her dark eyes fixed on the grand pavilion that rose from the battlefield's center, its banners tattered and soaked with the blood of the fallen. Inside, King Udama waited. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, his face weathered by years of battle and rule. His eyes were fierce, but they betrayed a glimmer of fear as Tur Enilotemp approached. Her shadow fell over him like a storm cloud, and the blade of sorrows whispered eagerly in her thoughts. The king did not flinch, even as his guards fell back, terror writ large on their faces.
"Monster,"
he spat, his voice trembling with both fury and despair.
"You were once our hope, and now you are our doom."
Hope is the first lie we tell ourselves, little king.
Her voice a chilling blend of the woman she had been and the darkness she had become. She raised the blade, its edge glistening with the blood of 1,000 souls.
But I am truth.
With a movement too swift for mortal eyes, she struck, severing his legs at the knee. King Udamo crumpled to the ground, gasping in pain, his face pale as death's cold hand gripped his heart. But Tur Enilotemp was not done. She knelt beside him, her dark eyes burning with an unholy light, and she began to feast. She started with his feet, her mouth opening impossibly wide, rows of sharp, shadowed teeth gleaming in the dimming light. She bit down, tearing flesh from bone, swallowing it whole as King Udamo's screams filled the air. She savored each bite, relishing in his agony, the power of his royal blood mingling with the divine ichor already coursing through her veins. Slowly, deliberately, she consumed him, inch by inch, foot by foot. The king's screams grew weaker, his voice a wet, ragged rasp as she reached his chest. His eyes, wide with terror and disbelief, locked onto hers, searching for any trace of mercy. But there was none, only hunger.
You could have surrendered.
She whispered, her voice like a death rattle.
You could have bowed.
With that, she devoured his heart, her teeth sinking into his flesh, tearing it from his chest. His body convulsed one last time before falling limp, his lifeblood pouring out onto the ground. She consumed the last of him, her hunger only momentarily sated. The silence that followed was thick and heavy, broken only by the distant cawing of crows. Tur Enilotemp stood, her body radiating with dark, malevolent energy, her transformation near complete. She was no longer Elowen, no longer the champion of the Radiant One. She was something new, something monstrous, an abomination crowned in blood and shadows. And as she looked upon the ruin of the battlefield, she smiled. A kingdom had fallen, and she was just beginning. Tur Enilotemp became a scourge upon the world, a creeping blight that choked the life from the land wherever she tread. Her name became synonymous with dread, whispered in hushed tones by those who still dared to speak it. She wandered the earth like a vengeful wraith, seeking out those who might stand against her, yearning for a challenge that could break the tedium of her blood-soaked reign. Heroes rose to face her, brave men and women who had once brought tyrants to their knees, who had slain beasts of myth and legend. They came from every corner of the realms, paladins sworn to forgotten oaths, mages wielding ancient and forbidden magics, rangers who could bend the shadows to their will, and with them came hope, a desperate ember that flickered in the hearts of the common folk, who prayed these champions might succeed where armies had failed. But Tur Enilotemp was no mere tyrant. She was no beast bound by the laws of the wilds. She was darkness incarnate, and her power was the void, the emptiness that devoured both light and life. One by one, the heroes fell before her. The first was a knight whose armor shone like a new dawn, his sword anointed in the blessed waters of a sacred spring. He stood tall against her, a living bastion of righteousness, but his purity meant nothing to the Blade of Sorrows. She defiled him slowly, stripping away his armor piece by piece, each one twisted and warped into grotesque forms before his disbelieving eyes. She flayed his skin with a lover's patience, peeling back his flesh to reveal the sinew and bone beneath. When his screams finally ceased, she raised his bones as her thralls, hollow and empty, puppets to her whim. The second was a mage old as the mountains, wise and cunning, with a mind like a steel trap. He wielded the forces of creation itself, and with a word, he could set the sky aflame or call down a torrent of celestial wrath. But his words failed him when she cut out his tongue and sewed his lips shut with tendrils of darkness. She trapped him within his own magic, a looping nightmare from which he could never awaken, forced to relive his own death for eternity. The third was a hunter, swift as the wind and silent as the grave. She moved like a shadow upon the land, her arrows always finding their mark. But Tur Enilotemp twisted her arrows back upon her, each shaft returning to pierce her flesh and pin her to the earth. There, the darkness crept into her wounds, and the hunter became the hunted, her body racked with endless agony until she begged for death, a death Tur Enilotemp denied. Each death was more grotesque than the last, each victory steeped in horror and desecration. Those who sought to challenge her did not merely die, they were unmade, their legacies turned to ash, their souls devoured by the unholy bond between Tur Enilotemp and the Blade of Sorrows. The gods watched from their lofty perch in the celestial realm, and for the first time in eons, they knew fear. From their ethereal thrones in the sky, they bore witness to this abomination that had once been mortal, this being that now walked among their creations with impunity. They saw the earth blacken beneath her feet, the rivers run red with the blood of the slain, and the sky darkened with smoke and shadow. And they trembled, for Tur Enilotemp had slain a god once. She had feasted on the divine essence and grown stronger still. What was to stop her from doing it again? The gods, those ancient beings of incomprehensible power, turned their eyes away from the suffering of mortals and looked inward, to their own realm. They were cowards, each and every one. In the grand hall of the heavens they convened. The hall itself was a sight to behold, carved from celestial marble that shimmered with the light of 1,000 stars, its pillars stretching up into the infinite. The air thrummed with the presence of divine beings, gods of every element and domain. Here, there were gods whose names had been lost to time, and others whose names still held sway over mortal hearts. But even the mightiest among them felt a chill deep in their divine bones.
What are we to do about this thing?
Rumbled Tharn, the Stormfather, his voice like distant thunder. His eyes, twin storms, flickered nervously.
She's no longer mortal, but not yet one of us. She's a blight upon creation, a threat to us all.
The goddess Lyria, whose beauty could still the beating hearts of men, frowned. Her voice, normally sweet as spring, was tinged with bitterness.
We cannot allow her to continue this rampage. She has already slain one of our own. The balance is shattered. The mortals cry out for salvation, and yet
none among us would be so foolish as to face her,
interjected Valor, the Lord of Knowledge, his eyes sharp behind 1,000 shifting lenses.
She has tasted divinity. She has bound it to her will. Any who challenge her would surely fall, as the Radiant One fell.
Murmurs of agreement rippled through the hall. Fear hung thick in the air, palpable even to beings who had never known the taste of terror. For all their power, they saw what Tur Enilotemp had become, a force that defied the natural order, a creature neither god nor mortal, but something in between. And they were afraid.
We are gods,
roared Ignar, the Flame Sovereign, his fiery mane blazing around his head.
We are eternal. Why should we cower before this twisted wretch?
Because,
came a quiet voice from the shadows.
None of us wish to be next.
The hall fell silent, the gods looking to one another, each seeing their own fear mirrored back at them. The truth was laid bare. They were cowards, every last one. They had grown complacent in their power, secure in their thrones. And now, something darker and more terrible than they could imagine had come forth from the realms of men, and they were paralyzed by the thought of facing it.
then what do we do?
Lyria pressed, her voice trembling.
If not one of us, then who? Who can stand against this horror?
Each god looked to the others, but none could meet their gaze for long. They had no answer, no plan, no hope. The gods had always been eternal, untouchable, but now they found themselves staring into the abyss. And the abyss stared back with eyes black as pitch, a smile of jagged teeth gleaming in the darkness. The gods, those once mighty rulers of creation, did nothing. They could only hope that Tur Enilotemp, the abomination born of shadow and broken light, would not come for them next. But deep within them, they knew hope was the first lie they told themselves. And Tur Enilotemp had become the truth. Tur Enilotemp walked the world like a shadow with form, her hunger gnawing at her like a wolf that never knew the taste of meat. For years she had been content to feast on the flesh and souls of those who fell before her, a whirlwind of darkness devouring all that dared to stand in her path. But even the hungriest wolf grows bored of simple slaughter, and Tur Enilotemp had begun to tire of the taste of mere flesh. She had learned in the way predators learn from their prey that there was more to devour than sinew and bone. When she tore a soul from its mortal shell, she felt a flicker of something deeper, a glimmer of what they'd seen, known, felt. Memories washed over her like water, sometimes in murky trickles, other times in raging torrents. It was then she realized that devouring a soul whole was a waste. There was knowledge within them, knowledge that could be extracted, savored, and consumed with the slow relish of a fine meal. Tur Enilotemp began to change her methods. She stopped simply crushing the bodies and spirits of her victims, and instead took her time, her terrible patience, unfolding like the petals of a night-blooming flower. She peeled back their minds layer by layer like the skin of a ripened fruit, and plucked the knowledge from their thoughts. She drank deep from their memories, their dreams, their fears. Every hidden truth, every whispered secret, every lie told and believed. All of it was laid bare before her. The more she consumed, the more she knew. And the more she knew, the more her hunger changed. She had once craved flesh and power. Now she craved understanding. Each mortal she consumed became a book, each soul a chapter, each life a page in the growing library of her mind. She saw the world as it had been, as it was, and as it might yet be. She learned the arts of war and the subtleties of diplomacy, the secrets of alchemy and the deepest mysteries of the arcane. She learned the stories of forgotten gods and the histories of entire kingdoms that had been lost to the sands of time. And as she learned, she grew weary of the sustenance of mere bodies and souls. She began to see her prey, not as meals, but as vessels of knowledge. And in the deep recesses of her twisted mind, a thought formed, a new hunger. She would not simply feast on the world. She would bend it to her will. She would turn it into a vast farm, a place where knowledge could be cultivated, grown, and harvested. So Tur Enilotemp walked the earth, warring and feeding for hundreds of years. She moved like a storm across the land, dark and unrelenting, leaving a wake of fear and despair. Empires crumbled at her approach. Cities fell silent, their walls stained with the blood of those who had dared to resist. All the while, she plucked the minds of men and women like fruit from a tree, filling herself with their thoughts, their knowledge, their lives. She became a being of endless understanding, a monstrous scholar whose library was the world itself. But even a scholar knows the limits of their books. She realized after centuries of war and bloodshed that she was depleting her stock. The well of knowledge was finite, and she was draining it dry. The world was growing quieter. The voices in her mind were beginning to repeat themselves like echoes in an empty hall. She needed fresh knowledge, new ideas, new thoughts to devour. She needed more from her prey than just the memories of battle and blood. And so, with the cold logic that only comes from a mind unbound by morality, Tur Enilotemp devised a new plan. She would cultivate her prey. She would make them more than just flesh to be slaughtered, or souls to be consumed. She would make them vessels of learning, repositories of wisdom and knowledge, and she would reap them when they were ripe. Across the shattered world, her will spread like a plague. Those who remained, the remnants of empires and peoples, were gathered and corralled like cattle. She decreed that they would read the books of all the great libraries of the world, those few that had not been reduced to ash in her wake. She made them study the arts, the sciences, the histories, and the philosophies of their forebears. She made them learn of magic and myth, of gods and monsters. She forced them to absorb every scrap of knowledge their feeble minds could hold, so that when she came for them, they would be more than just food. They would be chapters in a greater work, each filled with fresh thoughts and ideas for her to consume. And so it was that the shattered remains of humanity became scholars of their own doom. They labored under the shadow of their dark mistress, their minds sharpened to blades they could never wield, knowing that their only fate was to be devoured. They whispered to one another in the dark places and the secret corners of the world that perhaps there might be one among them who could hide their knowledge, keep some secret from her hungry gaze. But they all knew deep down that such thoughts were but the false hope of the damned. And while Tur Enilotemp cultivated her farm of knowledge and souls, the gods sat in their distant realms and watched. They looked down upon the earth with eyes that had grown dim with fear and inaction. They watched as their creations became the livestock of a new order, and they trembled. They had grown fat and complacent in their divine thrones, and now they found themselves faced with a predator more terrible than any they had known. And still, they did nothing. For the gods were cowards. Everyone. And Tur Enilotemp, the dark scholar of the world, continued to feed. Tur Enilotemp's hunger was a vast and terrible thing. It had driven her to scour the world of men, to unravel the skeins of mortal thought and devour every scrap of wisdom and knowledge that the broken earth could offer. She had learned all there was to know of love and war, of despair and hope, of life and death, every secret that had ever been whispered, every truth that had ever been spoken. Every lie that had ever been believed was now a thread in the dark tapestry of her mind. But a tapestry, no matter how vast, could always be expanded, and Tur Enilotemp, who had once been Elowen and had long since forgotten her own name, felt the hunger gnawing at her once more. There was one place left where knowledge still bloomed untouched by her ravenous reach, the realms of the gods. She turned her terrible eyes skyward, and the heavens trembled beneath her gaze. The gods had been watching her. They had seen the way she tore through the world, the way she devoured the souls of their followers, the way she twisted the natural order into something unrecognizable. And in their divine halls, they quaked with fear. For if Tur Enilotemp had come for them, what hope did even they have? But fear is a strange thing. It can drive a man to flee, or it can drive him to fight. The gods, in their infinite pride, chose the latter. They were deities after all, beings of unimaginable power and wisdom, born of the primordial chaos and formed in the fires of creation. If they could not stand against this abomination, then who could? And so they gathered for war. Pantheons that had been sundered by eons of enmity stood side by side at the gates of their realms. The old gods of earth and stone, the young gods of fire and light, the forgotten gods of shadow and bone. They all came together in a final, desperate alliance. The heavens were filled with their divine might, their forms blazing with holy light, their weapons gleaming with celestial fire. And Tur Enilotemp smiled. With the knowledge of 1,000 generations burning in her mind, she knew the secret ways to the holy realms. She had pieced together the hidden paths and forbidden rites from the minds of priests and sages, from the whispers of the dead and the mad. She knew the words that could bend reality, the sigils that could rend the fabric of the universe, the songs that could break the barriers between worlds. And with a whisper that was louder than any scream, she spoke them. The gates of the holy realms burst open with a sound like the shattering of stars. She stepped through, her form twisting and writhing with the dark energies that sustained her. The gods unleashed their fury upon her with the force of 1,000 suns. Lightning lanced from the heavens, fire roared from the depths, and winds howled with the rage of the divine. She was struck down, her body torn asunder, her essence scattered across the holy realms. But Tur Enilotemp was not a mere mortal bound by flesh and bone. She reformed piece by piece, pulling herself back together with a grim determination that defied all reason. And with each god that fell before her, her power grew. She devoured their divine essence, their knowledge of creation, their secrets of the cosmos. She became a force that could not be contained, could not be stopped. She became an unholy titan among gods, a darkness that blotted out their sacred light. The battle raged for centuries. She tore through their ranks one by one, pantheon by pantheon. The gods fought valiantly, wielding powers that had shaped the world since time immemorial, but they were nothing before her insatiable hunger. The old gods of earth and stone crumbled like dust. The young gods of fire and light flickered and died. She shattered their realms, tore down their thrones, and feasted upon their divine remains. For 150 years the war raged, a slow and agonizing death for the gods. Some tried to bargain with her, offering knowledge and power, if she would only spare them. She took what they offered, and devoured them anyway. Others tried to flee, to hide in the forgotten corners of the cosmos, where they thought her gaze would not find them. But Tur Enilotemp was a hunter now, and she relished the game. Those who ran were tracked down, their divine forms dragged from their hiding places, and defiled in ways that would make even the darkest horrors of mortal minds seem like child's play. She broke them apart, piece by piece, unraveling their divine essence, twisting their godly forms into shapes that should not exist. She tore into them, not just for their power, but for the raw pleasure of it. An artist sculpting with the flesh of gods, creating monuments of terror in the halls of heaven. And with each act of defilement she learned more. She pried open their minds like clamshells, searching for every last morsel of knowledge. She saw the threads of fate and destiny, the weavings of time and space, the secrets of the void and the heart of the cosmos itself. She saw everything, and still, it was not enough. For Tur Enilotemp, there would never be enough. She had consumed all that was and still hungered for what could be. And as the last of the gods fell silent, their light extinguished by her darkness, the cosmos seemed to draw a breath, as if waiting, wondering. What would she do next? In the silence that followed, her laughter echoed through the empty heavens, a low and terrible sound that carried with it the promise of something more, something far worse. And in that laughter, the universe trembled. Tur Enilotemp sat upon the nothingness. It was neither a throne, nor a rock, nor a patch of ground, for all those things had ceased to be. There was only her, vast and terrible, and the echo of what she had done. She had devoured the universe, and now there was silence. Restless, she shifted, her form coiling and twisting like a serpent. Her hunger had been a burning thing, a fire that consumed everything in its path. But now the fire had been sated, and she found herself left with the cold ashes of ennui. There was nothing left to learn, nothing left to conquer. She had devoured every god, every creature, every shred of knowledge that had once filled this universe. And she was disappointed. The gods had been so full of pride, so certain of their omniscience, but they knew nothing. Their secrets were child's play, their mysteries mundane. Even their fears had been small and petty things. Tur Enilotemp had thought that in consuming them she would gain an understanding of the great cosmic mysteries. Instead, she found herself standing at the edge of a vast, unremarkable plain. She let out a low rumbling growl that shook the very fabric of what remained.
So small.
She muttered.
So very, very small.
But there were other universes, other realms beyond this one where new gods ruled and new mortals lived. Perhaps they would be more satisfying. Perhaps their knowledge would be deeper, richer, worthier of her consumption. She would have to tear the veil between realities, step into their worlds, and devour them too. She closed her many eyes and delved deep into the endless library of her mind, piecing together fragments of divine knowledge and forbidden truths. She searched for the paths that lay between worlds, the cracks through which she could slip into new realms of existence, and as she searched, something unexpected stirred within her. A light. At first she ignored it. It was small and distant, like a flickering star in a vast, dark sea. But it grew brighter, more insistent, like a blade slowly sliding between her ribs. Her search faltered. She focused on it, and the light flared like the sun at dawn, hot and pure.
Impossible.
She hissed, her voice a chorus of 1,000 dark whispers.
There is nothing left. I devoured all.
But the light did not fade. It began to take shape, soft and warm, but unwavering. It was a shape she recognized, one that had been buried deep in the shadows of her mind for centuries. It was her, or rather, who she had been. Elowen. Tur Enilotemp roared, her voice shattering the empty silence, but the light only grew brighter. She twisted and coiled, trying to smother it, but it was like trying to grasp the wind. The light burned through her tendrils of darkness, searing her monstrous form. She felt something she had not felt in eons. Fear.
Elowen.
She hissed.
You are dead. You are nothing.
But Elowen's light did not waver. It grew stronger, blinding in its purity. The power Tur Enilotemp had taken from the Radiant One, buried deep within her, began to stir. It pulsed with a steady rhythm, like a heartbeat that had never stopped. The divine power of the gods she had consumed began to twist and warp, turning against her. From within the depths of Tur Enilotemp's chest, the light exploded outward. The monstrous form trembled and shuddered, tendrils of darkness snapping and withering away as the light grew and grew until it became impossible to ignore. And then, like a star being born, Elowen tore free from the heart of the beast, her body wreathed in blinding light. Elowen stood before Tur Enilotemp radiant and whole, her eyes cold and piercing. She looked upon the horror she had once become, her gaze steady and filled with a grim understanding.
Look at you.
She said softly, her voice cutting through the void like a knife.
Look at what you've become. A ravenous beast, a child of shadow and nothing more. And you, Blade of Sorrows.
She said, her voice rising, addressing the weapon that had wrought all of this.
You promised power, you promised salvation, but all you have ever brought is ruin and emptiness.
Tur Enilotemp recoiled, her many mouths twisting in fury and pain.
You are nothing.
She shrieked.
I am eternal. I am...
You are broken.
Elowen interrupted. Her voice was calm, almost pitying.
A hollow thing, consumed by your own hunger.
Before Tur Enilotemp could strike, Elowen moved. She was quick, impossibly so, slipping past the great shadowed tendrils and monstrous limbs. In one fluid motion, she struck out, her hand glowing with the divine light she had wrested back from the depths. She met Tur Enilotemp's dark eyes with her own, and with a voice that was both stern and sorrowful, she spoke a single word.
Begone!
She placed her index finger on Tur Enilotemp's monstrous forehead. The darkness buckled and writhed, a great howl of rage and fear rising from deep within. Tur Enilotemp screamed, her form tearing apart at the seams, shadow and essence unraveling like frayed threads in a gale. Her essence scattered to the cosmos, torn asunder and flung to the farthest reaches of reality. And in that void where once a great and terrible beast had sat, there was now only Elowen. She stood alone, bathed in the warm, comforting glow of her own light. Her heart ached with what had been lost, but there was also a sense of peace, a knowing that she was whole once more. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and for the first time in centuries, she smiled. The universe, what remained of it, held its breath, and somewhere in the distant darkness, new stars began to form. This story is really good in my opinion, but it feels like there could be more to it later on. I like that no matter how dark things get, you can't snuff out the light, and even though the darkness may consume you, it will only be able to do so for a short time before the light reemerges stronger and brighter. I wish to say thank you to my brother for writing this story. I hope that he plans to expand on it in the future. I, like many of you, would love to know more about Elowen's story. Until next time, stay safe and avoid any blades that have the name Sorrow in them.